Welcome back to part 2 of our multicam editing tutorial. In the time that we've been away, or I've been away, I've made a couple of changes which I'm going to update you on now. In our nested projects, which I have open all down the bottom here, so if we just open one of those up, I've gone through, and as I mentioned in part 1, I normally begin editing because normally you're going to be pushed for time with your editing, so you don't want to wait for a day while you render all of your files. Like, to render 6 cameras times 2 hours or 4 hours might be a day of rendering, maybe even more if your computer's a bit slower. So what I normally do is actually start editing, and then every time I have some downtime, I render my nested projects, which we had in part 1, which is here, to a new track. So you go Tools, Render to a new track, and I render to Cineform 1080p, and I'll go into the reason for that in a minute, and I'll cancel that because I've already done it. And you end up with a new track in your intermediate codec. So then you just hit the mute buttons on your original files, and you do that with each of your nests. So if you go through, see they've all got a new render on top of your existing files that came from the camera. They're all the same. So all you've done is replaced your camera files with a better editing codec. Okay, so we'll close all those up because we don't need them open. Let's see. Okay, and now we're back to... there's one more open there. We'll get rid of that one as well. Now we're back to our master project, and it looks no different. So it works all the same. What we did in part 1 is there still, but now it is reading from the Cineform codec, which when you're doing your multi-camera editing, if I play a bit of that, now I have no trouble whatsoever leaving it on the best full preview setting, and it plays without any hiccups whatsoever, which is great. It's a much better editing experience. If you can't afford to buy Cineform, that's fine. You could render to Sony MXF or to DNX HD, and it does the same thing. It will be a much easier editing experience in your master project. And you can do any of your color correction by right-clicking on your veg, your media FX, and you can apply whatever color correction. I would normally put, say, a color corrector and the levels, and then you can apply your color correction at a media level. So whatever you do with these corrections here gets applied to that camera right throughout the whole project. Side note, whenever you do a multicam project, you are so much better off to lock off all your cameras, and by saying that I mean to lock your white balance, to lock your exposure, to lock your shutter speed. That way, even if one ends up a bit brighter or a bit too dark, you can apply a global fix, which means you're playing here with one camera and you can make it brighter, or you can make it darker, or you can get rid of a blue tint or a red tint. Whatever you ended up with on the night, you can fix at a global level. There's nothing worse if you leave your cameras on auto and you're having to color correct virtually every cut you do. That camera will be changing as lights go on and turn off, and you will have to color correct 1,000 times. Virtually every 10 seconds it will be changing on you. So you always lock off all your cameras. There are downsides to that, as in here I ended up with my overhead camera was way too overexposed, and I just have to deal with that. That's better than having to chase it through the whole project and keep making changes. Okay, now getting back to what I was saying before, why I like to use Cineform is because you get First Light with it, which, as you can see here, I've imported to all of those files. Now I can go through, if I get out of the multicam mode and we go back to our JVC camera, which was the handheld, I'll change that take. I'll hit T and I'll go through until I hit our JVC camera, and you can hit a loop region, say, let's see, we'll just do a loop. Now you can leave that playing in Vegas, then go over here to First Light, and you can make adjustments, which is just amazing, I think. If it's too dark, you can brighten it up. Now if we actually get something in frame, there we go. You can brighten it up, you can back it off, you can make all different kinds of adjustments with your primary corrections in First Light. You can add saturation, oh look at that, like that you would. If it's too contrasty, you can back it off. You can increase your contrast. Anyway, you can make all of your corrections while it's live playing in Vegas, which just makes it so easy to color correct, because if you go back, and even while you're editing your project, if you go back to where you're doing your multi-camera stuff, then as you're editing and you notice, oh no, that camera is a bit bright, and you can go to it in First Light, which you can leave open on your other monitor, and you can just make adjustments on the fly. So if we go back to that one, that's our wide shot, HF30. Let's see, how does our wide shot compare to our cameras either side? Let's have a look. Okay, there's the GH2, there's our wide shot. But actually the colour correction on this job is pretty minimal, like they were all set reasonably well. So it basically comes down to if you want to introduce a look, or you want to harden it up, or make it, I don't know, you can do whatever you want to it. But it lets you do it on the fly, which is so good. I love this program. Anyway, that's enough about that. Okay, we might just actually deviate off a little bit into a little bit of colour correction. For people that have been using Sony Vegas for a long time, this will be no new information for them. But for people that might have changed from another editor or are just new to editing in general, this might be useful. There's a way to read your colour values and your luma levels. And to do that, you open up your video scopes, and this will get a bit crowded now because we're really lacking room, but I'll be alright. And there you can see these values here apply to the picture at hand that you're looking at in the preview window. Now, one small difference in Vegas as compared to Premiere, or to Avid I think as well, Vegas reads its levels from 0 to 255. A lot of other editors read their levels from 16 to 235. Now that might be over your head if you don't know much about it, but what it basically means is when you look at your image in the Vegas preview window, it looks a lot less contrasty than what it will look after you render out your video. To make it look in the preview window like what you will see after you render it out, you need to apply a filter, which is a levels filter, as a global filter. So that's what you select up here, and it just gets applied to everything in the project. And you select Studio RGB to Computer RGB. And as you can see, it changes what you're looking at. If I move that over there, if I turn that on and off, that's the way it is without the filter. That's the way it is with it. Increases the brightness. It also crushes the blacks and lifts a little bit of the gamma, I think, too. Yeah, it's a bit hard to tell, but that is what you will see after you render out your video. Now, the trap with this is, yes, that lets you see the finished product, but you have to turn it off before you render your video. You have to remember to do that. If you don't, then it's like a double whack. It'll be heaps darker and heaps brighter when you render out your video, which you don't want. It won't be true to what you've done inside of Vegas. So if you want to see what it's going to look like, you can apply that filter. It's normally easier to not have it on when you're trying to use your video scopes, because what you're trying to do in your video scopes, you want all of your blacks to be at 0 and none of your whites to be over 100. Why this is, you can make them less than 0, as they do when you turn the filter on, and if you increase it, you can drop them right down and crush them. But anything that falls below that 0 line is just dead black. There's no contrast in it at all. Likewise, anything that's above that 100 line is white already. So in the preview window, we can still see different types of blacks. You can see there's information there. If you render it out, it's all gone. Anything below there will be dead black, and anything above there will be bright white. So if you put that back to there, and then we turn it off. So all you would really do to color correct this, if you wanted to, would be maybe to crush the blacks a small bit, like that frame there. There's a little bit too much detail in the curtain, I think. So you might put that back to default. And you might crush the blacks a little, not too much. So you're going to lose a little bit of information in that curtain, which is fine. And you want to bring back your whites from over 100, and the way you do that is your output end. So you bring it all back down. Now these can be played with together. It's like you can crush as much black as you want. Then if you wanted to bring it back into legal levels, you just bring it back up. So you've still crushed the blacks, but now it's brought back up to legal levels. And what that means is if you introduce super blacks, which is what they call them when they're lower than 0, and you play a DVD on an old TV, it could cause the picture to roll. They're not equipped to cope with it. It doesn't really matter on a new LCD TV, but still that's what we adhere to. They're just rules. So anything below that 0 line is dead. It's gone. There's no difference between a grey on 0 and a black that's -10. They're the same colour on a TV. Most of the time, if your camera is set right with your exposure levels on the job, you will be very close to what you want anyway, as this one was. As for the colours, which you use your vectorscope for, if you wanted to push your colours, You might add a color corrector, maybe for the levels. Now this here, it reflects how bright your colors are. And then again, within legal levels are the outer rings of the circle. If your colors, like if you turn up saturation right up and blow it out like that, that is going to be a mess on a TV. It won't be able to display all of those colors, even though it's not too bad in your preview window. Once you turn that into a DVD and it gets played on a TV, it will just be blown out and blocky, and it won't be able to display all of that color. So you're normally aiming to have some nice color that bursts up close to the outer edges, but you don't want it to go past. Well, that's a very brief and simple explanation of working with luma levels and colors in Vegas. Very brief and very simple. There's a lot more to it than that, but that's a bit of a start if you didn't know anything about it. Okay, what I thought we might do just to finish off, we've been playing around with our little experimental project we made just for the purposes of this tutorial. So I thought we might jump back into the actual version just to show you what it actually looks like when you've got a longer timeline. So that's the completed project of the second half of this concert. Here we have all the markers for each of the dances, which can be transferred into your DVD chapters. The rendered version, which I just rendered to a new track over our project. It just helps if you get any errors in your render, then it's easy just to chop out the part that has an error, and then you can no recompress render the whole thing again and let the problem area go through again. Rather than having to render the whole project again, you only have to render that portion that had a problem. But there were no errors in this anyway. So if we have a closer look, what we've got, we just might mute that and make them smaller, get them out of the way a bit. So what we had for each of the sections was the intro voice, like the compere of the night. He did the little introduction. Yep. And then we had a title that was made up in After Effects. Then it goes into the actual edit, which is what we saw a bit of when we were playing around. And as you can see, the colour correction's already been done via First Light in this. And that's pretty much the way it will look when it goes out. Yeah, what else is there? Oh, the audio. There's the CD track, which I've overlaid. As you can see here, you get the applause actually dies away, and then you come into your CD track for the duration of the dance or any other event that you might be filming. And then at the end, comes to the end, and then you bring back your applause. Too easy. And that's pretty much what the whole thing looks like. All the different tracks. Oh, actually, as a side note, yet another side note. Did you know that you can have an adjustment layer in Vegas, just like in After Effects? And how you do this is you drop a levels or any other effects that you want to use as an adjustment layer onto a new track, which means you make a new track, like I did here, actually track number 3, and then you just drag and drop from your video effects. You choose what you want and you drop it onto the track, and it turns up in here, and then you can actually adjust that with your keyframes along the track. So here I had it at 1 level, just to, if I bring up my video scopes, I wanted to crush my blacks, but as we spoke about before, I wanted to keep them legal as well, which means they're crushed down but brought back up. Likewise with my highs as well, I brightened it a fraction but then brought them back to 235 to keep them legal. But then there was one track in the middle that was just way too dark. There was hardly any lighting, so I changed that effect with a couple of keyframes, and yeah, you can use it as an adjustment layer in Vegas, just like in After Effects, which I didn't actually know about until quite recently. Very handy sometimes. Okay, well that just about rounds it up, I think. I'll put some links to a couple of the dances for anyone that wanted to check it out the way it's meant to be seen. If you don't, that's fine. But yeah, there's a lot of ground we've covered. If you're unsure on things, you might have to go back and listen to it again. I've tried to keep it nice and simple, I hope. And if you have any questions, just leave a comment and I'll try and answer them as best I can. So, until next time, see you all later, and thanks for watching.